Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our second gospel class, at least second on the internet in the basement with the new program that we have now. I said last time, many of you I saw actually tuned in and watched. I was a little surprised. I was thinking that we would continue where we were in our class, and I even mentioned that we were up to the chapter festival at Panihati. But I see that many people were watching who don't attend the class, so I thought it would make more sense that we start at the very beginning. I gave last time, those of you who didn't attend, I gave last time just an introduction to the gospel. So we'll begin at the beginning. I also spoke a little bit about the introductory verse that we chant, which I will do now. Om Tabakatamratam Tapta Jivanam Kavivareditam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Shrimadatatam Bhuvigananti Puriyajanaha. This is a verse from the Gopi Gita, from the Bhagavata Purana, that M chose specially because we'll see he's constantly making this connection between Sri Ramakrishna and Sri Krishna and Chaitanya Deva and the Bhagavata Purana, and this is his way of showing the sacredness of the words of Sri Ramakrishna. This says, Tavagatamratam, your words are like nectar. Tapta Jivanam, they bring life to all of us who are scorched by the misery and problems in the world. Kavivareditam, they're praised by poets. Kalmashapaham, just listening to them can remove all of our sins. Shravanamangalam, auspicious just to hear the words. Shrimad Atadam, glorious and exalted. Bhuvigarantiye Bhurirajana, those who will sing the glories, recite these words, will give these teachings, in this case of Sri Ramakrishna, are the most helpful people in the world. Bhurira, they're one of the most generous people in the world. So this is the verse that M himself chose at the very beginning of the Katamrita, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. I will begin now with the reading from the English version, of course, that this is a translation that was done by Swami Atmajnanananda. This was done in 1942, and it's a beautiful translation. Somehow he had a knack of being able to capture the feeling and the spirit and everything. It is not the same as reading in the original, but he did a very beautiful job. The first chapter is called Master and Disciple, and the date given is February 1882. This and the second visit are the only two that don't have definite dates, because at this time, first of all, M's state of mind was not very good. Last time I mentioned that he had just left his father's house along with his wife and children, and didn't know what he was going to do, where he would stay or anything. And also, he didn't know how valuable the words of Sri Ramakrishna would be to him when he went that first day, and didn't have any thought of really coming out with a book or anything in the future. So all we have is February 1882. It was a Sunday in spring, a few days after Sri Ramakrishna's birthday, that M met him for the first time. Notice that M always speaks of himself in the third person. This was his way of hiding himself. Sri Ramakrishna lived at the Kali Bari, the temple garden of Mother Kali, on the bank of the Ganges at Dakshineswar. M, being at leisure on Sundays, had gone with his friend Sidhu to visit several gardens at Baranagur. Now, M is an extremely honest person. when it comes to himself. But it's very interesting to notice whenever anybody else is involved and he has any feeling that maybe they don't want things to be told about them, he's very careful. Either he doesn't use his own name or he'll just not be very forthcoming with certain events. So here, not that he was simply at leisure on a Sunday. He had left home and ended up at his wife's in-laws' house. This friend, Sidhu, was actually his nephew. And we don't know if Sidhu ever went again to see him or if he wanted his name mentioned or anything like that. So he simply says his friend. And they didn't simply go to visit some gardens in Baranagar, but his nephew took him there because M was feeling very depressed and he wanted to cheer him up. So this is a very interesting way of putting it. M, being at leisure on Sundays, had gone with his friend Sidhu to visit several gardens at Baranagar. If we don't know anything about it, we'll think that it's just a simple outing. But it was much more than that, of course. As they were walking in Prasanna Banerjee's garden, Sidhu said, "There's a charming place on the bank of the Ganges where a Paramahamsa lives, a holy man. Should you like to go there?" M ascended, and they started immediately for the Dakshineswar temple garden. They arrived at the main gate at dusk and went straight to Sri Ramakrishna's room. And there they found him seated on a wooden couch facing the east. So that means that as they entered his room, they must have gone inside the compound first. He would have been facing them. Most of the time, when M records Sri Ramakrishna speaking, we'll find that he'll be seated facing north. And most of the devotees will be there. For some reason, he was facing east, as if waiting for an M. So when M walked in, he was facing him. With a smile on his face, he was talking of God. The room was full of people, all seated on the floor, drinking in his words in deep silence. M stood there speechless and looked on. This, of course, was the great turning point in M's life, and somehow, intuitively, he felt something special was happening. It was as if he were standing where all the holy places met, and as if Shukadeva himself were speaking the words of God. Shukadeva, again, is a Bhagavata Purana reference. Shukadeva is the one who recited all of the incidents we have in the Bhagavata Purana to King Parikshit as he was lying on his deathbed, outside, of course. So again, this association came into M's mind with this Bhagavata Purana and Sri Krishna. Or as if Sri Chaitanya were singing the name and glories of the Lord in Puri with Ramananda, Swarup, and the other devotees. Second great Leela, which took place within the same tradition. Sri Ramakrishna said, "When hearing the name of a Hari or Rama once, you shed tears and your hair stands on end, then you may know for certain that you do not have to perform such devotions as the Sandhya anymore. Then only will you have a right to renounce rituals, or rather, rituals will drop away of themselves. Then it will be enough if you repeat only the name of Rama or Hari, or even simply Om." Continuing, he said, "The Sandhya merges in the Gayatri, and the Gayatri merges in Om." This was one of the great teachings of not only Sri Ramakrishna, but all of the really great saints and prophets of all the religions. This reliance on ritual is something which is important somehow in the beginning, but not so much at the end. We see in the life of Christ, and of course Easter Sunday is coming up very soon, in the life of Christ, how he wasn't very concerned whether his disciples even observed the Sabbath or not. That those who have this ecstatic love for God, they don't have to bother with these rituals very much. So the Sandhya is something that every Orthodox Brahmin is supposed to perform. Some of them do it 3 times a day. Some even will enter into water up to their chest and face the sun, repeat the Gayatri mantra, do the Sandhya Vandana, and all of that. Sri Ramakrishna, of course, was well beyond all of these things. So not only wasn't it necessary for him, but it was impossible for him to do these. Number one, and number two, he actually had taken these vows of sannyasa, and this is a ritual that belongs to the Vedic period, so this is also forbidden for the sannyasins. But he just, in general, he didn't want his disciples and devotees to be too overly concerned with ritual and lose the spirit behind it. So he said, if it's enough if we repeat only the name of Rama or Hari or even Om, and the Sandhya emerges in the Gayatri, that means that if we reach that level, and this is something which automatically happens, then no need to do all the puja and rituals associated with it, just repeat the Gayatri. And if we reach a point where we go even beyond that, then enough to simply say Om. M looked around him with wonder and said to himself, "What a beautiful place! What a charming man! How beautiful his words are! I have no wish to move from this spot." After a few minutes he thought, "Let me see the place first, then I'll come back here and sit down." This, of course, is a very traditional idea. If we go to a holy place, we should at least go to the temple and bow down. Now, perhaps M wasn't thinking like that because he was a member of the Brahmo Samaj, and they really weren't supposed to go and participate at all in any type of image worship, which they considered idol worship, and certainly not to bow down before the image. This also may have been part of the reason, but at least he wanted to see where he had come. As he left the room with Sidhu, he heard the sweet music of the evening service arising in the temple from gong, bell, drum, and cymbal. He could hear music from the Nahabat, too, at the south end of the garden. There were two Nahabats, of course. The one north of his room was the one where his mother lived first, and then where Holy Mother lived. This is the one that we know about, and has also become the sacred place of pilgrimage. The sounds traveled over the Ganges, floating away and losing themselves in the distance. A soft spring wind was blowing, laden with the fragrant flowers. The moon had just appeared. It was as if nature and man together were preparing for the evening worship. M and Sidhu visited the 12 Shiva temples, the Radhakanta temple, and the temple of Bhavatarani. This is the Kali temple. Now, one thing we'll notice, this goes throughout the Gospel, that M gives beautiful descriptions of the fragrance of the air, the wind blowing, the flowing of the Ganges, and gives a lot of detail. This is because reading the Gospel, we can feel that we're there. All of these descriptions are extremely important. When we read the Gospel, I mentioned last time, it should be a type of meditation for us. We should really feel that we're there with Him. We should feel that we ourselves are listening to His words. We should feel that we also know the time of the day and who else is in the room and what festivals are coming and everything. So this is not just filler for him. These were very important, all these little details. So this is the temple garden. There are 12 Shiva temples. These are all different Shiva lingams. They're just south of Sri Ramakrishna's room. Then the Radhakanta or Gītagovinda temple, the image of Krishna and Radha together. This is what Sri Ramakrishna always passed when he went from his room to the Kali temple, and would always bow down there first and then go to the Kali temple of Bhavatarani, the savior of the world. It's a very beautiful, rather benign image of Mother Kali. On the way back to Sri Ramakrishna's room, the two friends talked. Sidhu told them that the temple garden had been founded by Rani Rashmani. Of course, most people knew this was a very big thing in Calcutta, this temple. It was the most recent one and very large and combined all different types of worship. It was so many sadhus stayed there, beggars. We'll see all of this. He said that God was worshipped there daily as Kali, Krishna, and Shiva, and that within the gates many sadhus and beggars were fed. So this became very well known that any pilgrims who were traveling, especially on their way to Puri and other places, any sadhus, any beggars, they all knew that they were extremely welcome here, that there was a place for the sadhus to stay. It could be outside, but they could always take their food there. Those who were very strict and orthodox and vegetarian could take food from the kitchen connected with the Krishna temple, and others could take food connected with the Kali temple. When they reached Sri Ramakrishna's door again, they found it shut. So probably all the others had left, and Sri Ramakrishna was there by himself. And Brinde, the maid, standing outside, M, who had been trained in English manners and would not enter a room without permission, asked her, "Is the holy man in?" Brinde replied, "Yes, he's in the room." M, "How long has he lived here?" Brinde, "Oh, he has been here a long time." M, "Does he read many books?" Brinde, "Books? Oh dear, no. They are all on his tongue." Now, Sri Ramakrishna, we sometimes say that he was not exactly illiterate, unlettered. This means that in his childhood, he did learn to read and write. In fact, he had beautiful handwriting, and remembered enough so at the very end of his life he could scribble a little bit. He wrote a little note for Swamiji at the end of his life that Naren will teach others, but lost all interest and had a few books in his room that we know. He had the Ashtavakra Samhita and some others that he asked Swamiji to read out to him. There's one book full of Sanskrit verses. I forget what it's called now. Something Otar Sadhana. So, he had that. So there were a few books in him, but he didn't read books, and it was not necessary for him, of course. M was very brilliant and had studied extensively and knew all about Eastern philosophy, Western philosophy, literature, and everything. So this was, of course, we'll find very surprising to him. M had just finished his studies in college. It amazed him to hear that Sri Ramakrishna read no books. M, perhaps it is time for his evening worship. So again, thinking of this Sandhya. May we go into the room? Will you tell him we are anxious to go in? He wanted someone to go in and kind of introduce them. Brinde, go right in, children. Go in and sit down. Entering the room, they found Sri Ramakrishna alone, seated on the wooden couch. Incense had just been burnt, and all the doors were shut. As he entered, M, with folded hands, saluted the master. And now we see that in the future, M will not salute him with folded hands. He'll bow down before him. He'll touch his head to the forehead, his forehead to the ground. He'll take the dust of his feet. But he was new to all of this. And we'll see how, as a member of the Brahmo Samaj, he didn't follow all of the customs, and many of the others in that period in Calcutta didn't follow all the Orthodox Hindu customs. But for him, this was a sign of respect. As he entered, M, with folded hands, saluted the master. Then, at the master's bidding, he and Sidhu sat on the floor. Sri Ramakrishna asked him, "Where do you live? What is your occupation? Why have you come to Baranagar?" Now, this is also interesting, because later we'll find that Sri Ramakrishna, he himself would say, very rarely do I ask anybody, where do you come from? What is your family? What does your father do? Any of that? I'm happy to see them. This is enough. With M, and in certain other cases, when he has some feeling that there's some connection, he'll ask these questions. He asked, I believe it was Tarak, what was the name of your father? Now, why did he ask him that? He didn't ask that of any others. It turned out that his father was a great tantric sadhaka, and who had met Sri Ramakrishna earlier and actually prescribed something for him, an amulet and everything. So Thakur knew these things. We don't understand why and how, but he was curious to find out a little bit about M, where in the case of others, just to see them and to be able to know that they had some special divine potential was enough for him. M answered the questions, but he noticed that now and then the master seemed to become absent-minded. Later he learned that this mood is called bhāva, ecstasy. It is like the state of the angler who has been sitting with his rod. The fish comes and swallows the bait, and the float begins to tremble. The angler is on the alert. He grips the rod and watches the float steadily and eagerly. He will not speak to anyone. Such was the state of Sri Ramakrishna's mind. Sri Ramakrishna himself would give this illustration many times. Later M heard and himself noticed that Sri Ramakrishna would often go into this mood after dusk, sometimes becoming totally unconscious of the outer world. This was very, very common with Sri Ramakrishna. His mind could be triggered by things. This is called uddipana. He mentions this also many, many times. He had that type of mind that was very susceptible to environmental changes, to something that he saw or heard. He used to give different examples. If you went to the zoo and saw the lion, immediately he would think of Mother Durga, and it would go into ecstasy. So, and this is something that he also spoke about in terms of Radha and Krishna and Chaitanya Deva also, that seeing the black dark cloud, Radha would go into ecstasy, thinking of the complexion of Sri Krishna, or seeing, what are they called? The peacock. Seeing the peacock, that she would think of the peacock on Sri Krishna's forehead and would go into ecstasy. So this was part of that. Whenever just the sun would go down, it would start to get dark, that automatically Sri Ramakrishna's mind would go into this spiritual mood. M. Perhaps you want to perform your evening worship. In that case, may we take our leave? Sri Ramakrishna is still in ecstasy. No, evening worship. No, it is not exactly like that. After a little conversation, M saluted the master and took his leave. Come again, Sri Ramakrishna said. Now, I mentioned last time, this is a very standard way of saying goodbye to somebody. It's a polite way. If you don't say come again, it may mean that you're not really happy that they came in the first place. So nothing very special, but to M, this was a very great thing. That he said, yes, he asked me to come again, I'll have to come again. He took this as one of the adesh, one of the commands of Sri Ramakrishna. On his way home, M began to wonder, who is this serene-looking man who is drawing me back to him? Is it possible for a man to be great without being a scholar? How wonderful it is. I should like to see him again. He himself said, come again. I shall go tomorrow or the day after. Now, we don't know when he went. M simply says, M's second visit to Sri Ramakrishna took place on the southeast veranda at 8 o'clock in the morning. Maybe it was the next day, maybe it was after that. Maybe the following Sunday even, who knows. The master was about to be shaved. Now, Sri Ramakrishna, we know from his picture, he kept a short beard and he kept his hair short. The tradition among sadhus is either they don't shave or cut their hair at all. So many sadhus have long beard and long hair and everything. Of course, as Paramahamsa, they had no rules to follow. But the other tradition is that many Orthodox sadhus, once a month, the new moon day or full moon day, I don't remember, but once a month, they'll shave and cut their hair, and then it'll grow back, and then they'll shave their head and shave their beard again. And the same thing like that. Sri Ramakrishna was very, very sensitive. His skin was very sensitive. So growing too long wouldn't have been comfortable. Shaving too much wouldn't have been possible. So he kept a short beard, and he kept his hair short. He was so komalanga. We use that expression. He was so tender that he said sometimes he could even cut his finger on the edge of a luchi, this sharp like a puri. So the master was about to be shaved, the barber having just arrived. As the cold season still lingered, he had put on a moleskin shawl bordered with red. Seeing M, the master said, "So you have come. That's good. Sit down here." He was smiling. He stammered a little when he spoke. Sri Ramakrishna to M, "Where do you live?" So again, we'll have some questions. M, "In Calcutta, sir." Sri Ramakrishna, "Where are you staying here?" Because Dakshineswar, nearby, for us, it's just outside of Calcutta, but with just the horse carriage and everything, it was a little bit of a distant place. M, "I am at Baranagar at my older sister's, Ishan Kaviraj's house." His older sister. Is it his older sister or his mother's family? Or his wife's family? Anyhow, he may again be trying to fudge a little bit on things. Sri Ramakrishna. "Oh, at Ishan's. Well, how is Keshab now?" Keshab was related to the family. It must be his wife's family. I never noticed that before. Keshab, this is Keshab Chandra Sen. He was the head of the Brahmo Samaj. And we'll see the very close and loving relationship between Keshab and Sri Ramakrishna. He was a little bit older than Sri Ramakrishna, at that point in failing health. And Thakur loved him dearly, and Keshab had tremendous respect for him, and also loved him. And Keshab was responsible for sending so many people to see him. And Rhoda had him written up, either himself or had other Brahmas write about him in their monthly or bi-weekly magazine, the newspaper and everything, this Sulabha Samachar. So Thakur was very, very concerned about him. Well, how is Keshab now? He was very ill. Indeed, I have heard so too, but I believe he is well now. Sri Ramakrishna. I made a vow to worship the mother with green coconut and sugar on Keshab's recovery. Now, this he did several different times. Once, if I remember correctly, he even asked M, because to make the same type of offering, because there is a Siddheshwari Kali temple just within a block or two of M's house. And Sri Ramakrishna also went there at different times. A very I won't say beautiful temple, it's just right on the street almost, but tremendous atmosphere there. It's still there, a very old place you can go visit. So I made a vow to worship the mother with green coconut and sugar on Keshab's recovery. This is a very interesting type of vow. You don't give anything in advance. Unless you do it, mother, you won't get it. So you promise. If everything goes right, then mother will get her coconut and sugar. Sometimes in the early hours of the morning, I would wake up and cry before her, "Mother, please make Keshab well again. If Keshab doesn't live, with whom shall I talk when I go to Calcutta?" And so it was that I resolved to offer her the green coconut and sugar. Now, we should remember that Sri Ramakrishna's monastic disciples didn't start coming till just before this. In 1881, Rakal, later Swami Brahmananda, he came. Shortly after that, Narendra, or Swami Vivekananda came, and many came even after this. So at that time, Sri Ramakrishna, many of the people who came to him were through the Brahmo Samaj, Keshab and others, and Thakur knew that these weren't the ones he was waiting for. He loved them, he was happy to talk to them, but even at that time, he kept saying, "Oh, when will those young, unspoiled men come to whom I can really unburden my heart and who will follow my teachings fully?" That meant those who would renounce everything for God realization. Sri Ramakrishna is still speaking. Tell me, do you know of a certain Mr. Cook who has come to Calcutta? Is it true that he is giving lectures? Once Keshab took me on a steamer, and this Mr. Cook, too, was in the party. He could have been the first Westerner to see Sri Ramakrishna. We don't know exactly, of course. Yes, sir, I've heard something like that, but I've never been to his lectures. I don't know much about him. Sri Ramakrishna. Pratap's brother came here. This must be Pratap Majumdar. He was kind of a right-hand man at the Brahmo Samaj. He stayed a few days. He had nothing to do and said he wanted to live here. I came to know that he had left his wife and children with his father-in-law. Now, Sri Ramakrishna is saying, Pratap, that means he knows that M knows all of these people. And probably he's guessing that M is a member of the Brahmo Samaj. He hasn't asked him exactly. He has a whole brood of them, so I took him to task. Just fancy, he is the father of so many children. Will people from the neighborhood feed them and bring them up? He isn't even ashamed that someone else is feeding his wife and children, and that they have been left at his father-in-law's house. I scolded him very hard and asked him to look for a job. Then he was willing to leave here. Now, look at the games that Thakur is playing. Why does he bring all of this up? In the future, we'll find out. Of course, we know that M doesn't want to live in his father's house anymore. When he first leaves, is he willing to leave his wife there? And M will have this lifelong desire to renounce the world and to become a sannyasin like the others. So he's raising this other issue of somebody, how can they even think like that? They have a wife and children. Very interesting. Before he asked even, we'll see, before he asked M if he's even married, somehow he knew these things. So then we get the big question, are you married? M, yes, sir. Now, M thinks it's a very simple question. Most of the people will be married. Well, why should he hesitate? But we see the reaction, Sri Ramakrishna, with a shudder. Oh, Ramlal. Ramlal was a nephew of Sri Ramakrishna. They were practically the same age, but the relation was as a nephew. And he was also a priest at this time at the Kali temple. They kept switching around. There's all relatives and friends, acquaintances from that Kamarpukur area and Shihor and nearby villages. They all knew each other. They were all members of different Brahmin families there, or relatives, and they all ended up at this Kali temple taking different positions as priests or helpers there. So he says, "Oh Ramlal, alas, he is married." Now we'll find out later why Sri Ramakrishna reacts that way. Like one guilty of a terrible offense, M sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the ground. He thought, is it such a wicked thing to get married? The master continued, have you any children? Now, M this time could hear the beating of his own heart. He whispered in a trembling voice, yes, sir, I have children. Very sadly, Sri Ramakrishna said, ah me, he even has children. Thus rebuked, M sat speechless. His pride had received a blow. After a few minutes, Sri Ramakrishna looked at him kindly and said affectionately, now we'll get the reason. You see, you have certain good signs. I know them by looking at a person's forehead, his eyes, and so on. So there are two things with Sri Ramakrishna. One, he had this ability to kind of, what do they call it, physiognomy or something, by looking at the face and the hands, the way one walked, he would feel the weight of the arm, all of these ways of judging spirituality. And the second was, he recognized people. Those who had a future role to play, somehow he recognized them. Many instances are there where he had some vision before they came, or some dream, or knew they were about to come, something like that. So in M's case, it was more recognizing him at first, recognizing that he was a deeply spiritual person. I think most people just seeing someone like that can recognize that. A very serious, sincere, and deeply spiritual type of person. So Sri Ramakrishna was thinking, well, Maybe he'll be one of those who can renounce everything, but finds out he's married. Then children. Of course, nothing wrong with children. Children are wonderful. I wouldn't be here. I'm also a child. We all are. We need good householders and everything. But another type of bondage for someone who wants to devote himself full-time or herself full-time to spiritual life. So this is the reason, he says. You see, you have certain good signs. I know them by looking at a person's forehead, his eyes, and so on. Tell me now, what kind of person is your wife? Has she spiritual attributes, or is she under the power of avidya? Avidya, it means ignorance. Sri Ramakrishna had this concept that there are two different types of Maya, or different types of powers also. There's avidya Maya and vidya Maya, two different types of Shakti, of power. One will be leading to and helpful for spiritual life, and the other detrimental. So this is the type of question he's asking. Not so much is she a very learned or wise person. She is all right, but I'm afraid she is ignorant. Okay, so he'll get another scolding. Master, with evident displeasure. And you were a man of knowledge. M had yet to learn the distinction between knowledge and ignorance. That means real knowledge and ignorance. Up to this time, his conception had been that one got knowledge from books and schools. Later on, he gave up this false conception. He was taught that to know God is knowledge, and not to know him, ignorance. When Sri Ramakrishna exclaimed, and you were a man of knowledge, M's ego was again badly shocked. Master, well, do you believe in God with form or without form? Now, this is a very interesting type of question, and the reason why it comes up so much in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna has a little bit to do with the Brahma Samaj and Western influence, and Christian and Judeo-Christian Islamic conception of God as not having form. Now, there's a question of sakar. The sakar having form, it's very often not clear what is meant. And it may mean one thing to one person and a different thing to another person. In the case of M, we'll see that he's thinking in terms of the Brahma Samaj conception. Their idea was that when we say worshiping God with form, we're thinking of image worship, and for them it was a type of idolatry. So this is the first thing that comes into his mind. Worshipping God with form means that we bow down in the temple. There'll be a clay image or a stone image or something like that. And this is somehow a type of blasphemy. And we know, of course, in many religions, idolatry is a blasphemy. So this is in the back of M's mind a little bit, this idea of worshiping God with form. Now, there are far more sophisticated conceptions, of course. We know that. Worshipping God with form can also be that God can reveal himself in many different forms, these Puranic forms or anything like that. And then really a much higher and a much more beautiful conception that this whole universe is the form of God. Whatever we see, this is a form of God. The sun and the moon are the eyes, this idea of Purusha, this divine person. That the whole universe is the body of God. So this will also be God with form. But for M in the beginning, he's a little bit stuck in the rut of the thinking of the Brahma Samaj. So he doesn't want to say anything too much at this point. So he simply says, Sir, I like to think of God as formless. Master, very good. Now, we notice two things with Sri Ramakrishna. One is that and he himself said this, that it's not good to do anything harmful to the spiritual mood and attitude of a person. Second thing is that whenever he saw that someone's spiritual mood or spiritual attitude needed a little corrective, needed something to tweak it a little bit, to straighten it out, get rid of some misconceptions, he would always do that. So we see, especially many Vaishnava devotees would come. He would give them tremendous encouragement along their spiritual path. He would talk about the glories of repeating the name of God, and at the same time he would warn them against being too one-sided or bigoted or anything like that. So we see both of these things here. So initially, Sri Ramakrishna doesn't want to discourage him. So he says, very good. It is enough to have faith in either aspect. And at this point, M is probably not quite clear what he means. You believe in God without form, that is quite all right. But never for a moment think that this alone is true and all else false. Remember that God with form is just as true as God without form. But hold fast to your own conviction. Now, M is a very logical person. He's going to be very confused about that. How can one thing be one and at the same time the opposite? We'll see. He'll have these questions. The assertion that both are equally true amazed him. He had never learned this from his books. Thus his ego received a third blow. But since it was not yet completely crushed, he came forward to argue with the master a little more. M. Suppose one believes in God with form. Certainly he is not the clay image. So now we see that this idea of a God with form always triggers in their mind this idea of image worship in the Brahmo Samajas. Master interrupting, but why clay? It is an image of spirit. So, not Mrinmoy, Chinmoy. Sri Ramakrishna had a nice way of rhyming words and using puns and things like that. Not Chinmoy, not Mrinmoy, but Chinmoy. Now we have to remember that Sri Ramakrishna had the experience of worshipping Mother Kali in the temple, and because of the ability of his mind to go higher and higher and higher, he could enter into a different type of realm, where he would actually see that the image is an image of spirit, not just the image of the whole temple and everything, and wherever he looked, he could see everything as pure spirit. So for him, this was not just a nice phrase that he picked up, that Mrinmoy and Chinmoy. This is really his own direct experience. And when he would look at the image of Mother Kali, he would never see a stone image. Somebody asked him once, well, I hear that it's made of this basalt, a type of black stone. So Sri Ramakrishna, as if he couldn't quite grasp that thinking, that someone would even think of the material that it's made out of. He said, no, to me it's a pure spirit, pure consciousness. So, M could not quite understand the significance of this image of spirit. But, sir, he said to the master, one should explain to those who worship the clay image. Now, this is a very odd concept. Nobody worships a clay image. Their worship will be with the help of a clay image. If it's worshiping the image, then we think that that clay itself has some magical power. But anyhow, this was the type of thinking that many people had. One should explain to those who worship the clay image that it is not God, and that while worshiping it, they should have God in view and not the clay image. One should not worship clay. Okay, reasonable. But Sri Ramakrishna is not going to like it. Master sharply, that's the one hobby of you Calcutta people. Sri Ramakrishna, he liked to make fun of Calcutta people. All in good fun. He liked to tease them. There's the Babus who came, and with their Western thinking and with their inability to undergo any type of austerities or anything. That's the one hobby of you Calcutta people, giving lectures and bringing others to the light. Nobody ever stops to consider how to get the light himself. Who are you to teach others? Now this will be another great theme in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Who is actually qualified to teach others? Of course, teaching others in terms of school, book learning and everything. We get our academic credentials, and that's enough. In terms of God realization, only those who have had it. And even those who have had it some special command from God. This adesh again, this certain command from God, Sri Ramakrishna said, this chaprash, this badge, the badge of authority. So he was very clear that it's not easy, even someone like Keshab, who we had tremendous respect for. He wondered out loud many times how much good is being done by even Keshab's lectures. And he did tremendous good. He brought so many people to the spiritual life and everything. But without that direct realization, the words don't carry the same weight. So he said, yes, people will listen. In a few days they'll forget. So, who are you to teach others? He who is the Lord of the universe will teach everyone. He alone teaches us, who has created this universe, who has made the sun and moon, men and beasts, and all other beings, who has provided means for their sustenance, who has given children parents and endowed them with love to bring them up. The Lord has done so many things. Will he not show people the way to worship him? If they need teaching, then he will be the teacher. He is our inner guide. So Sri Ramakrishna had these two ideas. One, that God will manifest through a certain person, God-realized soul, or God will direct us from within, this idea of the Antaryaman. But this Antaryaman, this is a very advanced stage in spiritual life. Sri Ramakrishna used to say in the beginning, there's a human guru is necessary. When the mind becomes pure, the mind itself becomes the guru. So then we'll find light from within. We can get it, of course, even at earlier stages, but we don't know how much the mind is tricking us and playing on us. This is why we need the help of a qualified spiritual teacher. Suppose there is an error in worshiping the clay image. Doesn't God know that through it he alone is being invoked? He will be pleased with that very worship. Why should you get a headache over it? You would better try for knowledge and devotion yourself. This time, M felt that his ego was completely crushed. He now said to himself, yes, he has spoken the truth. What need is there for me to teach others? Have I known God? Do I really love him? And then M quotes an expression of the day. Sri Ramakrishna will also quote it later. I haven't room enough for myself in my bed, and I am inviting my friend to share it with me. I know nothing about God, yet I am trying to teach others. What a shame! How foolish I am! This is not mathematics or history or literature that one can teach it to others. No, this is the deep mystery of God. What he says appeals to me. Now look at M's deep humility. There were other cases we see where Sri Ramakrishna will criticize people, those who are very worldly, those who look down upon spiritual life and everything, and within a few minutes they'll say, let me take my leave, sir, let me go visit the temples, and then they won't be seen again. But Anne was very sincere, of course, sincere and serious, and took it directly to heart, understood immediately. He didn't react with his ego. He could have felt, who is this person to talk to me that way? He hardly knows me. And he's talking to me like I'm a little child. But M was not like that. And by now, probably, he's starting to feel that this is the man for me. This is Moner Manush. I like that expression. This is from the great Bao composer. The man of my heart. He is the one for me, the one who will be my guide. Because look at their conversation as if they'd known each other for years, the way they're speaking to each other. This intimate relationship. This was M's first argument with the master, and happily his last. M, you were talking of worshipping the clay image. Even if the image is made of clay, there is need for that sort of worship. God himself has provided different forms of worship. This will be another theme that we get, that so many different paths, that so many of us need these different aids in spiritual life. We may even say crutch in the beginning in spiritual life. These things have a tremendous role to play. Somebody asked Swami Vivekananda once about image worship. And he said, how can I say that it's not possible to realize God through image worship when the man that I laid my life down for, Sri Ramakrishna, realized God through that? So we'll see how liberal and broad-minded and vast was Sri Ramakrishna's vision of spiritual life. He who is the Lord of the universe has arranged all these forms to suit different people in different stages of knowledge. Now we'll get one of the images that's repeated again and again. The mother cooks different dishes to suit the stomachs of her different children. Suppose she has 5 children. If there is a fish to cook, she prepares various dishes from it: palau, pickled fish, fried fish, and so on, to suit their different tastes and powers of digestion. Now, taste and power of digestion. These were the 2 key things for Sri Ramakrishna. That we have to have a spiritual path that appeals to us, that's consistent with our spiritual mood and attitude and personality and nature. Are we more devotional in nature? Are we more intellectual, academic, cognitive? So it should be a path that doesn't clash with us. So it has to be something that appeals to us, that we have a taste for it. So Sri Ramakrishna said, ruchi bheda, that we all, this distinction in taste. But the second thing is, can we digest it? We may like a certain spiritual path, but are we qualified for it? This is adhikara, or hajam shakti, he would say, this power of digestion. And we find very often in spiritual life, and I think it happens most often with the path of knowledge, and especially this Advaita Vedanta, and this idea of this world being unreal and everything, that it appeals to many people, especially Westerners we see. It appeals to many of them. But Sri Ramakrishna says that this adhikara question comes. Are we qualified to follow it? Because the qualification means intense feeling of renunciation and dispassion. And without these, we find that it may appeal to us on an intellectual level, but we're not really suited for it. So he always talk about these 2 things. Different taste and different powers of digestion. Do you understand me? Now, M is going to start with a series of questions. These are the most important questions. I mentioned last week that the questions that M will ask and the answers that are given will form the basis for the entire body of teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. We can almost say the rest of the Gospel is just commentary and an expansion of the answers that are given here. So I want to stop here, and next time we'll start. The first question is, I'm asking humbly, yes, sir. How, sir, may we fix our minds on God? So now they've finished all the preliminary stuff, and M understands that he is now in the presence of someone who can answer these questions in a way that nobody else can answer them. So this will be where we will start. If you're following, or you want to start following on the text itself, this is page 81, the Master and Disciple. I will close with the traditional verse that's recited, and those of you who are sitting alone, I know that most people are self-quarantined and everything now. It's very nice after reading from the Gospel to what is often referred to as chewing the cud. That the cow will take the food and it'll go into a little sack, and he can bring it back up again and chew on it later. So it's very nice to let the mind dwell, to picture the scene, to picture this conversation that takes place, and to think about these beautiful teachings that we have. So it's nice to sit quietly for a while. When we have our class at the center, we usually have just a few minutes of meditation. This is a nice practice to do. Well, I will close now with the chant. Om Niranjanam Nityamananta Rupam Bhaktanubham Bhathur Vikrahamai Ishavataram Parameshamidhyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namah. We bow our heads before Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, of infinite nature, whose heart melts in sympathy for his devotees, who is an embodiment of the divine and the Supreme Lord, and ever worthy of our worship. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.